Elden Ring is full of mysteries. Mysteries that don't seem to add up or that have no dots connecting them. Some of these mysteries include: who really is Marika? A goddess? Puppet of the Greater Will? What is the Greater Will? What is the Elden Ring? Have Marika and Radagon always been one? What are the implications of that? What does it mean if they were two individuals that somehow morphed into one? And what the heck is the Elden Beast? These questions have plagued the community since the game first came out. The lore hunting community has done an amazing job thus far trying to answer these questions, and have made brilliant connections to various mythos, alchemy, and symbolism. I am simply building off their foundations and adding in my own finds. In this series of videos, I will attempt to unify these different mysteries into one coherent theory, a theory that will hopefully shed light on what is happening in-game, and the story that Miyazaki and George R.R. Martin were trying to tell us. This comprehensive theory comes by way of human psychology, alchemy, and astrology, specifically from a genius named Carl Jung and his theory on the human psyche and the process of individuation, also known as uniting the opposites. Carl Jung was a renowned psychologist of the 20th century and a pupil of Freud. Jung expanded on Freud's ideas of human development and coined the term individuation, a process of deep psychological development. Jung also connected the process of individuation to the alchemical process of the magnum opus, or the great work, with the result being the convergence and realization of one's true divine self. Although this process of individuation is incredibly important, and what I believe is the main story of the game, we must first lay the foundation for which to grow on. This foundation is the very concepts of the human psyche as told to us by Jung. In this video, I will cover the concepts of Jung's theory and connect them to our more mysterious characters within Elden Ring. As I mentioned, this first video is just to build the foundation for the rest of the upcoming videos. It is not intended to answer every question just yet, but rather to build the framework from which we can answer those questions. Before I begin, I want to show you an image that will hopefully get you on board to stick with me through this journey. What you see on screen is the result of a Reddit user asking AI to make an image of Jung's model of the human psyche. Compare that to this painting in-game. Here's another AI image. And here is the Elden Beast. These images are incredibly powerful and, in my opinion, undoubtedly show the connections of Jung's theories and Elden Ring. Another important point to add here is that each character of importance represents many different things. For example, Marika represents the ego and the Great Mother archetype in psychology. She is also represented as Earth in astrology, and the Holy Trinity spiritually. I bring this up out of necessity because this game is multi-layered, which means the characters are as well. So if after today you're saying to yourself, man, it's only part of the story, you'd be correct. But to not overload both myself and the audience, I must approach these videos very compartmentally. I'll break down these concepts in further videos and tie everything together, but for today, and probably for the next few videos, we must go an inch wide and a mile deep on these concepts to get the full picture. Disclaimer: these are incredibly difficult concepts to comprehend, let alone connect them to an ambiguous game. I am no expert on the subject, but I'm trying my best to understand what the game is telling us. Although I'll do my best to simply interpret the concepts of Jung, I will also add in my own speculations from time to time to paint a clearer, fuller picture. Now sit back, grab a pen and a notepad, and enjoy the combined brilliance of Jung, Martin, and Miyazaki. Most of us are familiar with Freud's theory of the human psyche, that which is comprised of the ego, id, and superego. Well, Jung built off of this and went deeper into the human psyche, and by doing so started something known as depth psychology. Jung's theory of the human psyche involved the following key players: the ego, the shadow, the self, the persona, and the anima animus. You will also see the terms consciousness, collective unconsciousness, archetypes, and more within the model of Jung. Those too are important concepts that help us understand the game better, but to understand those, we must first understand the former concepts. In this first video, I'll explain each of these concepts in purely Jungian terms, and then I will show how these concepts tie into the world of Elden Ring by linking them to key players in-game. To begin, let's start with the ego. Jung saw the ego as the center of the field of consciousness, which contains our conscious awareness of existing and a continuing sense of personal identity. It is the organizer of our thoughts and intuitions, feelings and sensations, and has access to memories which are not repressed. What Jung is saying here is that the ego is the decision maker based off our personal opinions and experiences. The best way to describe this is in the following way. When you say to yourself, I am going to go play Elden Ring, the I in that sentence is the ego. It is the you know about, the one above the surface. The you that makes decisions based off of your personal opinions, unrepressed memories, and how you want the world to be, not necessarily how it is or how it actually should be. The ego is the sum total of all of our decisions we make in life. From our decision of religion or spirituality, our decision of politics, our decisions of partner, friends, movies, etc. We make these based off how we interact and view the world. The ego is who we identify as. Next, we will cover the persona. The persona is like a mask you attach to the ego. We wear a different mask in different situations in order to get the world and ourselves to view us in a particular light. It acts to shield the ego from negative images. According to Jung, the persona may appear in dreams and take different forms. Over the course of development, children learn that they must behave in certain ways in order to fit in with society's expectations and norms. The persona develops as a social mask to contain all of these primitive urges, impulses, and emotions that are not considered socially acceptable. The persona archetype allows people to adapt to the world around them and fit in with society in which they live. However, becoming too closely identified with this archetype can lead people to lose sight of their true selves. For example, when you go on a first date, you wear the mask of consideration, of patience, of warmth. You try to convince both you and your partner that you are these things. Cut to year 10 of the marriage, and that mask is long gone, and the ego you shows up. We often wear masks to hide who we really are. The ego and persona are the things that make up a person's conscious psyche. They are the things above the surface and what the world sees and interacts with. It is who someone wants to be or how they want the world to be, not necessarily what someone's true reflection is or the reality of the world around them. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Now, let's cover the aspects of the unconscious brain. Unconsciousness is often referred to as a waterfall, a river, a well, the iceberg below the surface. I want you to keep in mind and think about where in game we find these very things. Again, I will come back to this in a later video, but for now, I want you to make the connection of in-game locations and the concept of unconsciousness within our psyche. Where in game do we go below surface, where it's dark and things are kept hidden? Let's begin exploring the unconsciousness with the shadow. The shadow is all the things you don't like about yourself and often project onto others. The shadow forms out of our attempts to adapt to cultural norms and expectations. It is this archetype that contains all the things that are unacceptable not only to society, but also to one's own personal morals and values. It might include things such as envy, greed, prejudice, hate, and aggression. Jung suggests that the shadow can appear in dreams or visions and take on a variety of forms. It might appear as a snake, a monster, a demon, a dragon, or some other dark, wild, or exotic figure. Often, The darker, more beastly side of ourselves that society would reject, or that our persona and ego would reject, make up the shadow. The shadow lives within our unconsciousness. It resides in the part of our psyche that we repress. It holds the characteristics of ourselves that we don't want to admit, something that we might associate with as a weakness or something undesirable. For example, if someone identifies, that is, their ego and persona, as caring and compassionate, they will repress any aspect of themselves that conflicts with this. In this case, the caring person would repress rage and hatred, and would often project those things onto others. Well, these parts of themselves also go into their shadow and get locked away, sometimes forever. We all know that one person who tries to be one thing all the time. Someone who is always trying to be happy, or is always trying to act tough. And often, that person seems very emotionally shallow and unbalanced. Well, that person never integrated their shadow selves, and because of that, their lives are often lesser than and lacking something true or whole. The shadow is something that we separate off from ourselves and hide in the deepest recesses of our psyche. The problem being that the longer we hide and repress our shadow, the stronger and darker it becomes, until one day, it tips the scales in its favor, becoming the dominant force of our psyche. Jung believed that nested within the unconscious were the anima and animus. The anima and animus are the male and female counterparts of our very soul. For our purposes, we will consider just the animus. When one is born a female at birth, the animus is the male side of her. The animus is the masculine characteristics that are within each female. Jung believed that one's complete soul had both male and female qualities within it, and that often the opposite sex of what one was born is often repressed. The animus within the woman is often depicted as a man she knows intimately. For example, it could be a father, a brother, partner, or how about a son? In today's day and age, these aspects of the opposite sex are becoming more widely accepted by society and thus are not disconnected from the psyche as often. However, in the early 20th century, that wasn't the case. Back then, if a man was born a man, he would repress any feminine qualities about himself, and same with the woman. Luckily, much progress has occurred since Jung's day, but the concept remains all the same. How many of us know that alpha male who would rather die than accept that he's a caring, soft, warm individual? You can see throughout history we are becoming more and more in touch with this aspect of ourselves, and humanity is all the better for it. But it comes with much difficulty. Here is what Jung says about the uniting of the anima and animus. The combined anima and animus is known as the Pscyhe, or the divine couple. The Pscyhe represents completion, unification, and wholeness. By now, we are beginning to paint a clear picture of what our conscious ego is and what our unconscious psyche is. Our conscious ego part of our psyche is pretty shallow. It only contains the aspects that we want it to contain, and unfortunately, it is how we present ourselves to the world. On the other hand, the unconscious side of our psyche becomes a prison for all the things we either plucked out or repressed. Things that we simply don't want to be associated with. But both are needed to be a complete, evolved, and enlightened person. If one does not do this, the prisoners will riot and begin to run the show. Have you ever heard the phrase, "You are not the master in your own home"? Well, this is exactly what this is saying. We have all had a moment in our lives that we act out or develop anxieties and think to ourselves, where did that come from? It comes from deep within our unconscious psyche. In that case, you are no longer the master of your own home, and the inmates are running the show. Lastly, and most importantly, we have the self. The self is the culmination of all the concepts we just covered. The self is only revealed to us once we have what Jung calls united the opposites, or completed the process of individuation. It is also who we are as a child. Jung considered that from birth, every individual has an original sense of wholeness, of the self. but that with development, a separate ego consciousness crystallizes out of the original feeling of unity. How many children do you know that have polarizing political opinions, or that repress a part of themselves? None, or should be none. That is because the child's psyche is well balanced. They are just being. They aren't trying to be anything. As we grow, we have experiences. These experiences affect the decisions we make. These decisions affect how our ego and persona develop, and over time, we often lose touch with our original sense of self, of wholeness. It is a very cause and effect pattern. Ultimately, the goal of individuation is to get back to that wholeness we had as a child, but with the knowledge we gained. Unfortunately, as we grow, we start to split off from ourselves, making a clear divide of what we want and don't want. That is, we tear off pieces of ourselves that we want to hide. We keep doing that until we have totally lost our connection to our roots. We wake up in a world we don't want to be in. This statue is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. It seems like a man nourishing the Erd tree during its infancy. However, it is much deeper than that. Imagine the crucible as our childlike psyche, where the conscious and unconscious parts of ourselves coexist. Then, as we grow, different parts of our personality begin to take shape. But we only nourish the ones that we want and let the other parts of ourselves die. The Erd tree is a representation of our ego and persona. It got us where we are and served us for a while, but things are taking a turn for the worse, and the other parts of ourselves that we buried in the roots are banging at the door. If we are still rejecting parts of our psyche, one's true self will never be actualized. However, once we accept all the parts of our psyche and reintegrate them into a whole, balanced system, the self flourishes and is, according to Jung, godlike. The self might equally be called the God within us. Another famous depiction of this concept is from Leonardo da Vinci, by way of the famous drawing of the Vitruvian Man. Funny enough, this is how my theory began. When I first started playing the game, there was something familiar about the way Marika looked, outside of the obvious crucifixion, compared to how Radagon looked with his arms stretched out wide in a T-shape. Then, later in the game, you realize that they are one and the same, but different. I realized if you superimpose their images, you get the Vitruvian Man. The Vitruvian Man is a famous drawing of Leonardo da Vinci, where he managed to square the circle, the mathematical and mystical question that stumped polymaths for centuries. In simple terms, the Vitruvian Man is someone who is both a circle and a square, the square representing physical qualities and the circle representing the divine qualities like thoughts and intelligence. The circle is also associated with feminism, and the square, masculinism. This is also true in family trees, where the men are represented as squares, the women as circles. When both the circle and square are united, they become godlike. Remember the quote by Jung, the combined anima and animus is known as the Psyche, or the divine couple. Well, Psyche doesn't just apply to anima and animus, it also applies to any opposing qualities that unite, such as matter and mind. If you look at where Marika's arms are, relative to the Vitruvian Man, they touch the circle, representing the spirit and feminism, while Radagon's arms touch the square, representing the physical and masculinism. Funny enough, the word Numen means divine spirit, so it's very fitting that Marika represents this aspect of the Vitruvian Man. We get confirmation of this by their respective source seals. Marika's source seal raises the divine qualities, such as mind, faith, intelligence, and arcane, while Radagon's source seal raises the physical aspects, vigor, endurance, strength, and dexterity. It is clear that these two are parts of a whole balanced being. Before we go any further, I want to look at a few different diagrams that represent the human psyche. First, we have Jung's model, the one we have been referencing throughout this video. Notice how it's one concept with others interacting inside of it. Next, we have William Blake's version. Again, interconnected circles representing different aspects of our psyche. Now, let's take a look at the Elden Ring. Very similar. And we know that the Great Runes all have their own unique characteristics, kind of like different parts of one's personality or psyche. That's right. The Elden Ring is the representation of Marika's, and collectively, humanity's, psyche. I'll give more details as the video goes on, but it fits beautifully with the narrative of the game, the different representations of the human psyche, and the different great. We have covered personal consciousness and unconsciousness well by now, but Jung didn't stop there. He believed that everyone also contained a collective version of these. The collective consciousness you can think of as the zeitgeist, the defining spirit or mood of a particular period of history as shown by the ideas and beliefs of the time. This is often associated with things like wars, political structures, religious structures, regimes, etc. On the other hand, collective unconscious is a term introduced by Jung to represent a form of the unconscious, that part of the mind containing memories and impulses of which the individual is not aware, common to mankind as a whole, and originating in the inherited structure of the brain. It is distinct from the personal unconscious, which arises from the experience of the individual. According to Jung, the collective unconscious contains archetypes, or universal primordial images and ideas. I'll expand on this concept in a later video as they deserve their own time in the light. Because this game is multi-layered, where some characters can represent both the personal aspect and the collective aspect, I need to quickly address this in this video. Here's a quick example to give you an idea of what this concept is conveying until we can further expand on it. The Pope has personal aspects of his psyche that will affect the way the Catholic faith is expressed and viewed during his tenure. However, he also has collective aspects of the entire things that he might not have had a direct hand in, but has guided him to becoming the leader of this faith. That Pope will have his own personal shadow, while the entire Catholic faith will have a gigantic collective shadow. Unfortunately, for that Pope, while he is the leader, he must face both of those burdens. This is a very broad and crude way of putting it, but it gives you an idea of what Jung is saying. Jung also believed that within the collective unconscious, there were things called archetypes. These archetypes are common personas that we all wear from time to time. For example, we have all embodied the archetype of the rebel. At some point in our lives, probably in our teenage years, we fight against authority, go against the grain, and fight for independence. Jung believes that these archetypes go across time and cultures as far back as the rise of humanity. It is not something that we are taught or learned, but something that lives deep within us and that we have access to. I will cover this concept in another video where I look at the demigods and how they are archetypes within Marika's psyche. For now, let's turn our attention to the concept of the collective shadow. Within the human psyche, there is a collective shadow. The collective shadow is the humanity's dark side. It is the sum total of past and present atrocities, cruelties, tragedies, and horrors perpetrated by mankind and stored at a deep, unconscious, cellular level. These are things we have done as a human race that we don't want to face or admit and hide away. Things like genocide, persecution, concentration camps, slavery, etc. These are things that we hold within our collective shadow, and just like in the personal shadow, sooner or later we must face these things, or they'll come back up and bite us while we're not looking. You could make the argument that this is already happening. Just look out in the world or turn on the news and watch the riots, the brutality, the hatred, and injustice that is. This is our collective shadow spilling into our collective reality. At this point, I'm sure many of you are connecting the dots for yourselves. Dots that have hopefully become clearer and closer together. Let's connect these dots together. This entire game is a psychoanalysis of the human race and how our consciousness, that is, our ego and personas, led to division and fractures throughout both the inner world and outer world. Where have we heard that phrase before? An interesting thing to note is that consciousness is often analogous to will. That is to say, we use willpower to make decisions and go through life. Every time you act out a thought, you are using your will to do so. You could say that our collective version of this might be something called the greater will. For the rest of today's video, I want to show how these Jungian concepts apply to Queen Marika and how they answer the more mysterious questions of what is happening inside Elden Ring. I'll be focusing just on the personal aspects of these concepts for today, and we'll turn to the collective side in a later video. But keep in mind that Marika represents many things, such as Christ, humanity, Mother Earth, etc. Who is Queen Marika? Which aspects of her personality has she groomed and nourished? Which parts of herself has she locked away? What are her prime objectives? Let's take a look within the psyche of Queen Marika using Carl Jung as our guiding light. What does Marika want the world to see? Well, we can answer that by looking around the world at the various statues. She is a mother, a warrior, a queen, life giver, blessing giver. These are all the things that make up her conscious psyche, her ego and persona. Jung had a name for someone with these qualities: the Great Mother. The Great Mother is an archetype of Jung and has the qualities of life giver, queen, Mother Earth, etc. But like all mothers, she also has a dark side. This archetype is often referred to as the loving and terrible mother. On one hand, she is the creator of life, and on the other, the destroyer of it. Jungian psychologist Erich Neumann wrote the book The Great Mother, an analysis of the archetype. Fitting that Marika is of Neumann race and represents the Great Mother. In this book, Neumann says, "But for every positive creative force, there must be an opposing destructive one. This notion is doubly true in the esoteric world of Carl Jung, where all archetypes must, by necessity, possess a shadow self. The dark twin sister of the Great Mother is the terrible mother, a force of death and destruction. This archetype inhabits the world of primordial instincts and is frequently represented as subhuman or even animal-like in form." Another thing that Jung said about the ego is that it should be small and hard, like a stone. Marika's appearance in the Erd Tree has always perplexed me until I heard Jung explain this. It's yet another confirmation that the game is indeed heavily influenced on Jung's research and that Queen Marika represents the ego. At this point, we can figure out what Marika's shadow is: death and the destruction of her creations. And what is plucked from the Elden Ring, which I said is the representation of Marika's psyche? Destined death, also known as the Rune of Death. That's right. Based off of everything we learned so far, Marika and the Gloam-Eyed Queen are one and the same. Marika is the ego, and the Gloam-Eyed Queen is the shadow. Now, I'm sure many of you are screaming at me saying, "Dude, she literally has a shadow in game. Malekith. You know, the big black beast?" Yep, you are correct. But remember, the shadow holds those characteristics about ourselves we don't like. The shadow is like a safe where we keep things hidden away that we don't want. The things inside that safe are a real shadow, not necessarily the safe. In Jungian terms, the shadow is often described as dark, beastly, terrifying, which is why in-game the shadows have the same appearance. However, what the shadow holds within themselves is different from person to person. For example, Blythe and Malekith have the same features but act totally different. Blythe is friendly and loyal, aspects of Ranni she hates about herself, and thus puts into her shadow. Malekith is terrifying and holds the power of death, aspects of Marika that she hates about herself. So yes, Malekith is indeed Marika's shadow, but the qualities within him are what Marika is actually repressing. For our purposes, you can think of Malekith and Destined Death as one and the same. Once you defeat Malekith, Destined Death is released back into the world, and more importantly, back into the psyche of Marika, making her one step closer to a whole divine being. Let's unpack that a little further. We know that Malekith defeated the Gloam-Eyed Queen, and that Marika ordered him to seal Destined Death away. There are two ways to think about this. One is that Malekith saw his Empyrean disobeying the Two Fingers by embodying the Gloam-Eyed Queen, and thus defeated her. The other is that Marika hated this part of herself so much that she asked her half-brother to kill that part of her and lock it away forever. Think about it like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Marika couldn't stand embodying death and thus searched for ways to lock that part of her away. Either way, if the theory holds true, then the Gloam-Eyed Queen is the dark twin sister of Queen Marika, the great and terrifying mother, as told to us by Newman. This is also saying that Melina is another projection of Marika, which is actually incredibly fitting. Again, each of these characters deserves their own video, so I won't go into a ton of detail now, but the duality of Melina is the physical representation of Marika and the Gloam-Eyed Queen. Melina is Marika, well, a projection of her. This explains the incredible powers and incantations that Melina has. It explains how she can orate the echoes of Marika. It also explains why she is doing what she is doing, and that she can transform into the Gloam-Eyed Queen. This statue has stumped the community for a long time. Some think it's Godwin. Some think it's an unknown Empyrean that has 3 shadows or something. But now, we have a much better understanding of the game and what it is trying to tell us. This statue, like the rest of the game, represents many things. It represents Marika splitting her qualities into the ones she likes and doesn't, thus creating her shadow. It represents humanity gaining enlightenment and leaving their beastly selves behind. It also represents a spiritual split from following the practice of animism towards a more structured religion. More on these in a later video, but let's focus on it symbolizing Marika splitting herself and making her shadow. Why is it that Malekith is here? Why is this his boss room? Well, because this is where he was born. This is the very point in time where Marika made the decision to repress certain things about herself that she didn't enjoy, and thus created Malekith, her shadow. Why is it the fair Missoula is stuck in time? Yes, Placidusax has that power, but what does it mean on a deeper level? What else can you think of that is suspended in time? Something that you can go back and visit, but fades and crumbles as time goes on. How about a memory? This is Marika's memory of her splitting off from her shadow. Over time, the other elements have crumbled, leaving the physical place in ruins. But the statue remains in perfect condition. To take it one step further, what part of the human experience is shown throughout our entire lives? Our childhood. Our childhood experiences shape every decision we make throughout our lives, and this is why Fair Missoula has pieces of it everywhere in the lands between. It is Marika's childhood sprinkled in her consciousness. Pretty cool of the developers to show it in this way, and even cooler now that we have an understanding of it. It's important to note that one shadow is created as soon as we start repressing certain aspects of ourselves. This means that Malekith wasn't created when Marika removed destined death, but rather much earlier on in her life. It wasn't until Marika came into power and the Urtru was flourishing that she removed the rune of death. Remember what Jung said about repressing one shadow? That the longer one represses it, the darker and bigger it grows? Compare the size of Malekith to Blythe. This shows that Marika has been hiding this away for a very long time. By avoiding her shadow, Malekith grew bigger and more powerful in the dark until she could no longer defeat him and reintegrate him and Destined Death back into herself. This is where the Tarnished, Roundtable Hold, and Hugh come to existence. More on this later, as I want to stay focused on Marika and the Golden Order for today. I'm sure many of you are putting that together on your own, but stick with me here. Another interesting point about Fair Missoula is that the sun never sets. This is because this is where Marika's shadow lives, and you must have constant sunlight in order to have a shadow. Yet another incredible detail the developers put into the game. At this point, we have a pretty good idea of what Marika's conscious psyche is all about. Life, creation, nurturing, etc. We also know the aspects of herself she removed and stuck into her shadow, destined death, the destruction of her creations and of life. One thing that needs to be mentioned is how Marika and the Erdtree came to power. It's clear that Marika defeated all the other factions in order to rule, not very caring and nurturing. But recall what Newman said about the Great Mother. She is great and terrifying. It wasn't until after she established her rule that she removed destined death. In doing so, Marika created the Golden Order and broke the natural cycle of life, death, and rebirth. Over time, that unbalance turns the world into ruin. Let's move on to Marika's animus. Remember, the animus is the masculine characteristics in the female psyche. It is often attributed to characteristics such as rationality, unemotional, strength, etc. And it often takes the physical form of a male that is very close to the female. A father, a brother, in our case, a son. It didn't take long for the community to notice that Radagon and Godwyn look eerily similar. The only real difference being that Radagon has red hair. More on this later. They even wear the same clothing. It's clear that Marika's animus is taking the physical form of Godwyn. But remember, this game is both on a personal and collective level. So Radagon actually takes on a few different concepts. But for today, let's stay focused on the personal animus of Marika. Let's look deeper into Radagon and get a better picture of how he fits into the role of Marika's animus. First, let's look at what Radagon does that is explained to us in-game. He is the head of the Golden Order's army, which indicates he has incredible battle prowess and strength. Next, he marries the enemy and ends the Liurnian War, saving countless lives and strengthening both houses, perhaps even neutralizing Rennala, but that still needs more examination. Either way, these are very rational diplomatic moves. He also studies sorceries and incantations to be whole, which indicates he has felt less than whole for his entire life, like he is missing a part of himself. Lastly, he goes to the capital, and next thing you know, Marika and Radagon are one being. Obviously, he had a much fuller and deeper life within Elden Ring, such as the connection to his children, but again, for today, let's stay focused on these concepts. I promise to address them in later videos. This would also explain how a mere champion came to be Elden Lord. Recall this quote by Jung: "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Radagon's symbol is the Web of Wyrd. The Web of Wyrd depicts the connection of the fates. This is a complex, interwoven symbol that is representative of the complexities of the fates. It is a representation of the past, present, and future. For the Vikings, the Web of Wyrd was the reminder that the deeds not only affect the present, but the future as well. Radagon is Jung's quote, "come to life." He is the living, breathing fate of Marika's actions. He is the totality of all her past actions and becomes a Leo Hound of the Golden Order. The Web of Wyrd also implies the cause and effect of one's lifelong decisions, and thus, the law of causality is born. We are stepping a bit into the territory of collective unconsciousness, so I'll leave it at that for now. Back to the personal animus of Marika. It's clear that through his actions, Radagon displays those iconic masculine qualities. He takes on the form of Godwyn and becomes one with Marika. Remember this quote by Jung: "The combined anima and animus is known as the Pscyhe, or the divine couple. Represents the completion, unification, and wholeness." By the time we enter the game, this reunion has already taken place. And note the color of the Erdtree: yellow or gold. This will be important in an upcoming video where I connect Jung's theory of individuation to alchemy and what we see in game. Finally, we have the self, culmination of all the different aspects of one's psyche. The self is the very center of one's being, the very beginning, but in order for it to be actualized, it has to be integrated with all the other parts of one's personality. Once the psyche can hold in balance the ego, persona, the shadow, the anima and animus, the self is actualized and is, as Jung puts it, godlike. The Elden Beast is Marika's self. Not until Marika's shadow and animus are incorporated back into her psyche does the Elden Beast show itself. Now you're all saying, the Elden Beast was the first thing to come to lands between and gave life. How are you saying this? But remember, the self is also the very beginning of one's psyche. And as one goes through life, we cut off certain parts of our psyche. And not until we put them back together can we get back to our true self. Elden Beast is the true form of the Elden Ring. It is said that long ago, the Greater Will sent a golden star bearing a beast into the lands between, which would later become the Elden Ring. This first quote is telling us that the Elden Beast is the true form of Marika, as Marika and the Elden Ring are synonymous. So, if the Elden Beast equals the Elden Ring, and the Elden Ring equals Marika's psyche, then it holds that the Elden Beast is Marika's whole united psyche. It does not say in game, but I'm sure that the Elden Beast went through different forms before the one we see in game. Just like the Elden Ring changed throughout the life of Marika, it must be true that the Elden Beast did as well. The second item description tells us the origins of the Elden Beast, that it came via a golden star from the Greater Will. Throughout history, in various mythos, enlightenment, consciousness, birth, are all symbolized by a bright light. It's analogous to the phrase, someone turn on the lights, when describing someone's consciousness. It's also analogous to the symbol of a light bulb above someone's head when they have an idea. Light is often symbolic of consciousness. This description is telling us that the Elden Beast is the birth of Marika's psyche, maybe even the very birth of Marika herself. We have also established that the Greater Will is analogous to humanity's will, or the human spirit. That means, once humanity gained enlightenment and consciousness, the golden star, aka the Elden Beast, was the symbol of that. Humanity, through its natural processes, gained intelligence and consciousness, and that was the birth of the concept of order. We know from the Elden Beast remembrance that it is the incarnation of the concept of order. It's easier to think of it through a Christian lens, which we will in an upcoming video, but today we must stay on track. Consciousness only wants to make things make sense, and thus order is established. Order works well until certain groups feel they are the highest of order and gain supremacy. Once order becomes chaos, humanity is lost. Here's an example, albeit a very... Leaders like Hitler and Stalin strived for order, so much so that it led to some of the world's worst acts in history. Those within those regimes completely lost their humanity and their willpower to stand against that horrific party. This is also why communication with the Greater Will has been lost. We have completely lost our humanity and spirit along the path of order. It's not that the Greater Will is this outside God that is manipulating us, but that the actions we have been taking are no longer making sense. Let's take another look at Malekith's boss room and the version of the Elden Ring we see there. You can see that order is forming out of the chaos. It is Marika's ego forming out of her unconsciousness. Here is another diagram of the human psyche, which represents the self-ego relationship. As you can see, in the beginning of one's life, they are one and the same. When someone is born, they are mostly operating in the unconscious realm. As they go through life, they develop an ego outside of the self. This is all well and good until we lose connection to ourself completely. When this happens, one is forced into the process of individuation, which reconnects the ego back to the self. This diagram has striking resemblance to the Elden Ring. In Fair Missoula, where Marika is still a child, herself and ego are still one, but the ego is just starting to pop out, thus creating the shadow. The Elden Ring we see in the majority of the game is the ego completely detached from the self. meaning Marika is lost and has completely forgotten who she really is. Something that happens to most people. Throughout the game, she is attempting to reconnect these two things. More on that in the next video, where we will discuss the details about the process of individuation. One thing I've noticed is that the Elden Beast looks incredibly similar to the human nervous system. You can clearly see the central column within the Elden Beast, which looks identical to the spinal cord. Off of that, it branches off and looks like nerve endings. Once you reach the head of the Elden Beast, it has a bright spot in the brain. If you Google an image of consciousness, you will find something very similar to the Elden Beast's head. Obviously, the Elden Beast also has wings and a tail root thing going on. This to me represents its growth throughout Marika's life. From a side that took roots through the Age of the Dragons and into the Enlightenment period we see now. The Elden Beast represents the combination of our consciousness and unconsciousness, of our body and spirit. It is the totality of everything Marika is and should be. It uses Radagon as a sword, not because Radagon was some covert spy sent by the Elden Beast, but because Radagon was the physical side, the masculine side of Marika's soul. It is now how the Elden Beast does damage, physical damage, to us players. Also notice the double helix structure of the sword, showing that two parts of the soul are combined into one. Where else do we see this? The Godslayer sword, which symbolizes Marika and her shadow, aka the Gloam-Eyed Queen, combined. One question that remains, however, is why do we need to kill the Elden Beast? If it's Marika's godlike self, with all things reintegrated back into it, shouldn't it be good and something that should live on? Well, I have a few thoughts on this. The first is that it's a video game, and killing gods is just part of it. The journey and understanding remains the same, but at the end, we get to kill a god. Another way of thinking about it is that we need to set this new psyche of Marika's free. As a Reddit user noticed, when you hit the Elden Beast, it sounds like glass shattering. This could symbolize that we are in fact breaking open Marika's newfound psyche and spreading it across the lands between. The last thought I have is that the Elden Beast represents the Philosopher's Stone, and by breaking it open, we unleash its power on the world. Either way, in each ending, we heal Marika, and she remains the Elden Ring. Frenzied Flame, although with the exception of the Frenzied Flame ending, which in my opinion most likely represents something like annihilation, but more on that in a later video. Every ending, we reintegrate the aspects of Marika's repressed psyche and reveal her true godlike self. After that, it's up to us how we want to use that power. Before I end this video, let's take a quick look back at what we've learned, as it can be a lot to retain. We learned that Marika is playing the role of the Great Mother, whose qualities include life giver, mother, mother nature, nurturer, blesser, etc. Next, we uncovered that Malekith is Marika's shadow in Jungian terms and holds within himself all the qualities that Marika hates about herself, the opposite of her persona, which is death and destruction. This is why Malekith holds destined death within himself. Next, we learn that Radagon is Marika's animus, the male counterpart to her soul, and takes the appearance of Godwyn because that was an important male figure in Marika's life. Finally, we learn that the Elden Beast is Marika's self, the culmination of all these aspects once reintegrated back into the psyche, and is referred to as godlike. Note that when we defeat the Elden Beast, it says God defeated. In the next video, I will show how these same concepts not only apply to Marika, but also humanity, and how when we apply these terms from a personal aspect to a collective one, it paints an even clearer picture of what is happening in-game. I will also show the timeline of the game and how they relate directly to the human psyche. After that, we will show the steps of individuation and how they are analogous to the alchemical process, the magnum opus. Thank you so much for watching this video. It has truly been a great work, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it was able to shed some light on what is happening in-game. If this is something that you like and enjoyed, please consider subscribing, as I will continue to produce these types of videos. I also do many live streams where I chat with you all about your interpretations. If you wouldn't mind giving this video a like, it really does mean a lot. Don't forget to comment as well, as I will be discussing all your feedback in a later video.